Mastering workplace performance is more than just being productive at work. It's about the process of improvement. For a few minutes, I got to speak with Dan Pink, author of the book Drive. Actually, he's written a few things, and this one book really changed the way that I took a look at motivation, intrinsic, extrinsic, and really diving into the process of improvement. Now, those of you in Mastering Workplace Performance, you know the next book that I'm writing is called Your Best Just Got Better. So I got to sit down with Dan. We had a quick 15-minute conversation, and I asked him my usual questions, all about the process of getting from where we were to where we are to where we're going. Please enjoy this conversation. Let us know what you think. You can find Dan on Twitter at Daniel Pink. And if you have any questions that you'd like me to pass along, can't make any promises, but I really enjoyed this conversation, got a lot of value from it, and if I could encourage you, stay till the end. The last 2 minutes are magical. How does Dan influence himself to engage in the work you do?
Good God, I have no idea. I'm not that introspective. So how do I influence myself to do the work that I do?
Yeah.
Is that it?
What's that thing that says, "Oh, I got to do this today"?
I think it's a bunch of. It's an interesting question. Honestly, I haven't reflected a huge amount on it. I think it's a combination of the macro and the micro. The micro is getting a sense over the years of how I do my best work and honoring that in the way that I would if I were working with somebody else. If somebody came to me and said, Dan, here's how I do my best work. I start early in the morning. I work on one project at a time. I try to do it regularly. That is, for me, momentum is really, really important. Doing something one day, the next day, the next day, the next day. If I were working with that person, I would say, cool, I'm going to give you the space to do that. You know how you work best. Let me get out of your way. And so I try to take that approach to some extent with myself. Over the years, I've figured out how, just some very small micro things about how I work best. For like tougher, more creative kind of work, I am much better in the morning than the afternoon or the evening. And so I try to do things like start early, clear my calendar, turn off my phone, and that sort of thing. I, much to my dismay, I'm finally decided in my, mid-40s to stop fighting it. I've discovered over the years that I am not very good at working on multiple things at the same time, having, several projects going at the same time. I am the sultan of sequence. I like to do one thing and the next thing. I don't think that's necessarily the best way to be, but it's my nature. It's how I am, and so I try to honor that. And so on those micro things, it's really getting a sense of how I work best and honoring them in the way that I would if I were working with somebody else. I think in many cases, we treat ourselves in an inferior way to how we would treat other people. And so I try to think of that. And then on the macro is, especially on the bad days, I try to think about, okay, why am I here in the first place?
Right.
Instead of getting sucked in the maw of the day-to-day, I have this article due. I have to finish this chapter. I have to conduct these 3 interviews to find out more. I have to read this paper. And I have to answer 86,000 emails. I try to take a step back as much as possible, particularly when I'm feeling, the extra weight of stress, and say, okay, man, why are you doing this in the first place? What's the point of the exercise? And that's been very helpful to me on the macro level.
Something that you said really stands out to me, and I know the people listening to this are going to relate to this in different ways, but the next thing that I usually like to talk about are what are the successful routines or habits that you've put into place. But Dan, one of the things that I heard you say, which I'd love to hear a little bit more about, I know I'm going to write some more about this, is you realized that there was a before and an after. That is, there. I don't want to say there was a judgment before, but you went from living in a world, it sounds like, where multitasking and having several things going on simultaneously might have been a reward. Oh, look how busy I am. Look at what I'm engaged in. And what I heard you say to the effect of this, I love the Sultan of Sequence quote. That to me is a pretty interesting thing, where in this world we live in, I'm sitting here at a desk with two monitors while I'm talking on these phone calls. I actually turn the one monitor off and I turn the backlighting completely off on the other one, because I know if it's bright or shiny, I'll look at it.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, Jason, because what I've done for this conversation, which I find myself doing, is when I'm out doing stuff, I sometimes or do sports or whatever. I will often wear contact lenses, but here in my office, I always wear glasses. And what I've done is I can't see. I have really, really bad vision. Sometimes my vision is so bad that if I wake up and my glasses are off, that I can't see well enough to find my glasses. And so what I've done in this conversation, if we were on Skype, you would be able to validate it, is I have taken my glasses off and put them on the top of my head. So what I see when I look out right now is just an absolute blur, so I can focus in on this conversation.
In an interesting way, it's almost like you've taken your glasses off to gain clarity.
Oh, nicely said. Yes, indeed. I love
in
that.
my mind, I have the image of Seabiscuit, the horse who's ready at the gate, and he's got those blinders on the sides of his eyes. They don't put the blinders on because it's comfortable for the horse. It's, we have to go into, not myopia here, but we really have to.
No, that's a really nice way to put it. And there is a sense of I have in some ways disabled myself, because, it's easy to fix. I can put my glasses back on and say,
sure.
How many emails have come in since I've been on the phone with Jason? But I haven't done that. I have my glasses on top of my head, so I really can't see anything. I can see the broad contours of the trees outside and my monitors and whatnot, but I can't see a damn thing, and that makes it easier to have this conversation.
So one of my favorite topics, Dan, you and I haven't spent enough time together to know, but I taught high school as a first career. That was kind of my impact on the world. And, teaching the 14, 15, and 16-year-olds, I'm always curious. 14 years old, you're either a freshman or about to become a freshman in high school. What did you think of your opportunities? When you look back on that time of your life, did you know New York Times bestseller, speaker of the world, going to change the way people think? What was going on in Dan's world?
Wow, it's interesting you asked that question, because it makes me reflect in another way too, because I happen to have a 14-year-old in my house right now, and I'd be curious to ask that question about her to her. As for me, when I was 14, so I must have been a freshman I was a freshman in high school. I don't think I had any deep thoughts. I was probably as befuddled and confused as any 14-year-old is. And I guess I did have some emerging interests, but I don't think there was a lot of clarity. I don't think that I had I'm 46, so that would have been 32 long years ago. I don't even think it occurred to me to wonder what I would be like when I was 46. Honestly, I don't think it crossed my mind. I think what crossed my mind was getting through the day, being slightly less miserable than I was yesterday.
The day before.
So, which I think is not anything about special about me. I think is in some ways the fate of some 14-year-olds. And that's not because I was living in some kind of dire circumstances at all. I resolutely middle class, never wanted for food a day in my life. My parents were together my whole childhood. Nothing. I have no sort of, did not live in poverty, so it wasn't anything like that. But I just remember being kind of bewildered and slightly annoyed.
The reason that the question is so interesting to me is back to this theme of improvement and the process of improvement. A lot of the audiences that I'll speak with, the feedback we'll get at the end is, Jason, I've never really had to stop and think about where it is I'm going, other than I got to get up tomorrow, I got to go do my job tomorrow. I really like to bring it kind of all the way back, very similar to you, Dan. Grew up, had what I needed growing up, and there wasn't a time period there definitely was a teacher. I think we all had a teacher or a coach or a mentor or someone who came along at some point, whether that was, grammar, middle, high, or college school or something like that. But the reason the question for me is so interesting really is when people look back on what they were thinking about their future 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, has there been a change in what am I thinking now about the next 40 years, the next 50 years? Those kinds of things.
I think that there ought to be a change, because if there isn't a change from the time you're 14 to the time you're 46 in your perspective on the world, then I don't think you're fully growing as a human being, fully engaged in the world. So, I've probably given a little bit more thought to the next 32 years than I did 32 years ago, looking forward there. But that's partly because I know a hell of a lot more about the world right now, and I guess I'm mature enough and seasoned enough to even ask those questions. And in some ways, 32 years, if you're 14 years old and you're asked to look out 32 years, in some respects, it's like asking a 14-year-old to look out 1,000 years. It's almost
forever.
Like unfathomable, right? Forever. Whereas for me, I can actually see 32 years from now. I can kind of, understand what's going on. I've got 3 kids. I think about, okay, in 32 years, my daughter is going to be my age right now. And, my other kids are going to be, I'm going to have another, going to have 3 kids in their 40s, it's something you can wrap your mind around a little bit more from the vantage point of mid-40s than from the vantage point of 14. I think about it. Honestly, I think that if I think about 14 years old, I think that the sweatshirt that I'm wearing, I got more than 14 years ago. Mm-hmm. So my sweatshirt is older than I was at the moment that the moment you're hearkening me back to.
And I know I want to be conscious of your time, Dan, and thank you very much. Are there any teachers or mentors or a mentor story where you look back and say, wow, that was a fork in the road?
I don't think there was anyone where there was kind of a fork in the road. I don't really have in the narrative of my life that kind of dramatic inflection points at all. And that could be simply the way that I process things. For me, it is there have been a lot of people in my life whom I've worked with, who were teachers, who were professors, from whom I have harvested one important nugget that has been important, rather than a kind of pure transformation. So instead of saying, I was at a fork in the road and they told me which way to go, right. It was more kind of, there again, if I can push the metaphor a little bit, there are people who I happened to be there, and I looked on the map and they said, hey, here's the rate, here's the speed that you're going, and here's the general direction you're heading, and give me some kind of feedback. So it's really much, much smaller things. The one thing that I can think of was I had a writing seminar in college. Small. I think I was a senior in college, and it was the title of it was like intermediate expository writing, or sort of this kind of upper level English class seminar where we, basically like 8 or 9 students, and we sat around and we read essays and wrote essays, and that's all that we did. And my teacher there said something really interesting to me once, and where he said, sometimes you write to figure stuff out. And I'd always been taught that you basically figure out what you want to say and then write it down. And I remember a time 2 years prior in college when I was taking a philosophy class on ethics of all things. And I remember, I was sort of screwing around, and I ended up writing the paper really, really late. I basically pulled an all-nighter. I started at like 8 o'clock at night. It was due 9 o'clock in the morning, or some absurd thing like that you do when you're 19 years old and you're an idiot. And remember, this is back in when I was a sophomore in college, there were not PCs. And so I was doing this on an electric typewriter. Mm-hmm. And anyway, to make a long story short, we had it was a short, like 5-page paper, something like that. And what we had to do is we were presented with some kind of ethical problem, and we had to apply a certain ethical philosophy to resolving it. And and I don't even remember exactly the facts, but I had said when I got the problem, okay, I think the answer is A. I believe A. And because, okay, so I know about this ethical philosophy. Here's the dilemma. This is the ethical thing to do. It's A. And I started writing it. I found myself basically saying B. And I felt like I ended up marshaling the arguments for B, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm doing this. I'm saying something they don't believe. But I'm out of time, so I just got to turn in this paper saying something I don't believe. And I was always kind of bothered by that until this professor came along in my senior year who said, sometimes you write to figure stuff out, that in the course of writing, you might change your mind. And I guess in a very childish, simple-minded way, I had never really realized that explicitly because I had always been taught, establish your position, then defend it. Say what you want to, figure out what you want to say, and then write it down. And he said, and I was like, oh my God, you're allowed to do that? You're allowed to change your mind in the course of writing? And when I found that, it's sort of liberating, and I found like that's what it is to be a writer, that you often don't know exactly what you think until you apply the discipline of writing about it. And if you do change your point of view over the course of it, that's a good thing, because it means that you're pushing at it. It means that you're engaging. It means that you're really tangling with the topic. So, it's not quite a fork in the road, but it was a very important learning for me that I don't know whether I would have gotten as explicitly had it not been for that teacher.
I believe that if the people in the Mastering Workplace Performance online course listen to the last thing that you just said, that this call will change someone's life. I'm sitting here with a big smile on my face. What you've really validated for me is the importance of the process of engagement and improvement. And I can't thank you enough, Dan. If I can ever return the favor, or when I'm in DC, if I can buy you a cup of coffee or tea, I'd love to do that. But thank you on behalf of all of us over here. For your
My
time.
pleasure, Jason. I'm glad. Great to have a chance to talk with you. Great to have to sort of. I like the way you sort of very gently forced me to wrestle with these very complicated and deep topics. So that was very effective.
Well, nothing like a nice Friday morning.
Absolutely. Now I can just cancel my therapy session for the afternoon because I already have it done. So.
Hey, I'm at your beck and call.
All right. Thanks so much, Jason.
Dan, I'm holding a copy of your book, Drive. I'm going to recommend that all of our participants read this. And all
right,
I hope
thanks.
that we turn a few more fans your way.
Fantastic, Jason.
Have a great day.
All right, cool. Thanks so much, Jason. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.